So what's the outlook for the U.S. economy in 2026? Well, according to a brand new forecast from Deutsche Bank, it is not going to be a simple story of boom or bust. Nope. Instead, what we're looking at is a high-stakes tug-of-war. So let's dive in and see who's pulling in which direction.
The title of their report kind of says it all. Keep on rockin' in the not-so-risk-free world, and honestly, that really nails the forecast. The economy's music is still playing, things are definitely moving, but there are some pretty serious risks bubbling just below the surface that we really need to keep an eye on.
So what's the big headline number? Well, the baseline forecast is for 2.4% annual GDP growth. After what's expected to be a chaotic 2025, this points to a much more stable, solid footing for the economy. But how we get to that 2.4%, well, that's where the real story is.
All right, to really get that 2.4% number, we have to start with the positives. The report calls these the tailwinds. These are the powerful forces that are actually pushing the economy forward.
Just remember that 2.4%, it isn't a given. It's the end result of this constant battle, a really intense struggle between the forces of growth and the forces of resistance.
So, the first major tailwind, it actually comes from a pretty unexpected place: tariffs. Now, if you look at these charts, you'll see this absolutely massive spike in both tariff revenue and the average tariff rate in 2025. The big story for 2026 is that the forecast expects this to flip, providing a huge cost relief for both businesses and consumers. Okay, so why the sudden drop? It all boils down to a legal challenge. The forecast is basically banking on a Supreme Court ruling that could limit the president's power to slap on these kinds of sweeping tariffs. And if that happens, that super high rate we just saw, it would fall off a cliff.
The second tailwind is a direct boost for consumers. We're talking about a $50 to $60 billion sugar rush in the form of bigger than usual tax refunds, and they're expected to hit bank accounts in early 2026.
So where's all this extra cash coming from? It's the result of several tax law changes. The big ones are things like making tips and overtime pay completely tax-free. And because these changes get backdated, it means a lot of people could be getting a much fatter check from the IRS than they were expecting.
But, it's not all smooth sailing, not at all. So let's move to the other side of the rope and take a look at what's pulling the economy back. These are the headwinds.
And the biggest force pulling back is a shaky labor market. Even with the economy growing, the forecast sees unemployment climbing up to around 4.5%. Now, that's not a total disaster, but the report warns that the situation is fragile, and it's actually much more likely to get worse than it is to get better.
And that, of course, brings us to the elephant in the room: artificial intelligence. I mean, is all the hype about AI replacing jobs finally starting to show up in the data? Is it contributing to that labor market weakness?
And wow, the data gives us a really fascinating clue. Take a look at these two charts. On the left for software developers, on the right for customer service. You can see the trend lines for the younger, early career workers are actually falling, while the lines for more senior staff are still going up. This suggests AI isn't just replacing jobs, it might be substituting for those entry-level roles specifically.
But here's what's maybe the most surprising part of the story. The main response from companies isn't layoffs. As this chart shows, the biggest bar by far is retrain. It seems firms are way more focused on retraining the staff they have and just hiring fewer new people. Outright layoffs? That's actually the least common response, at least for now.
All right, next up, let's talk inflation. In 2026, it's not just one single story. No, it's its own internal tug of war, a race between forces pushing prices up and forces pulling them right back down.
So here's the matchup. On one side, you have falling shelter and rent inflation, which is a massive chunk of the budget for most people. This is putting some serious downward pressure on prices. But fighting against that, you've got the tariffs, which are pushing up the price of pretty much all goods.
And you can see that race playing out right here on this chart. Notice the light blue line. That represents housing costs. It's forecast to trend steadily downward through 2026. But fighting against it is the dark line for core goods, which is actually expected to tick back up, all fueled by those tariffs. They are literally moving in opposite directions.
So who wins the race? Well, it's almost to dead heat. Core inflation is forecast to land at, you guessed it, 2.4% by the end of 2026. So we get close, but that final really difficult mile to get back to the Federal Reserve's 2% target, well, that's still a challenge.
So with growth and jobs and inflation all in this delicate balance, what does the referee do? Let's take a look at the forecast for the Federal Reserve.
The forecast lays out a pretty clear game plan.
For the first part of the year, the Fed just stays on the sidelines, keeps rates on hold. But then a big change comes in May, when new leadership is expected to take over. And that sets the stage for the next big move, a predicted rate cut in September.
Now, to understand that cut, we need to know about this term, the neutral rate, or as economists call it, R star. The easiest way to think about it is like the Goldilocks interest rate. It's not so high that it slows the economy down, and it's not so low that it speeds things up too much. It's just right.
And this is where it gets really interesting. That September rate cut isn't happening because the economy is in trouble. No. Instead, it's projected to take rates slightly below that just right neutral level. The report suggests this is less about the economic data and more about a fundamental change in philosophy under the Fed's new leadership.
So to wrap all this up, despite this pretty stable forecast, the report is absolutely filled with warnings. So let's look at the big unknowns, the real wildcards that could come in and change this entire picture.
There are 3 huge risks to watch. First, the real impact of AI. Is it just going to displace workers, or will it create a massive economy-wide productivity boom? Second, the independence of the Fed, especially under new political pressure. And third, just plain old fiscal sustainability, with government deficits forecast to hit a whopping 6.7% of GDP.
And this brings us to the final and maybe most important question. The top-line number says 2.4% growth, a stable economy. But with a vulnerable job market for some and uneven inflation for others, will the benefits of that stability actually be felt by everyone? That remains the biggest unknown of all.